FPV. If you're familiar with my channel, you know I'm a huge fan of the Whoop class quads. That was a brainchild of Jesse Perkins, who started the tiny Whoop craze. What is interesting to me is the evolution that's going on in the Whoop class. We're starting to see two branches of the Whoop classes. The first branch being, if you look at the original tiny Whoop, it was a brushed 65 millimeter, based off of an Inductrix flight controller. It's an all-in-one. It did have a separate camera and VTX, obviously, but that quickly evolved into these 65 millimeter brushless Whoop type quads. And again, they have the traditional all-in-one flight controller and ESC and receiver. And then that branched off to larger quads like the 75 millimeter Beta 75 Pro, the first version here, and then Tiny Hawk, and then the trash can. So if you look at these, they're more suited for indoor flying. Even the 2S trash can over here, if you put a throttle curve and or a throttle limit on it, it flies quite well indoors. So these are more for indoor and with light backyard flying. If there's any sort of wind, they really don't do as well. The other branch is what I call the micro stack branch. They're, all separate components. They have a separate ESC, all-in-one ESC that's separate from the flight controller, and then the receiver is typically something that is also separate. And the advantage of that is you can put in your own receivers, you can change out the ESC board if it burns up. So it does have its advantages, but it is heavier. It's more suited for park flying and backyard type flying. So, it's typically more expensive. The manufacturing costs are higher than for the all-in-one type Whoops over here. So with that, I wanted to review the Spedix REX brushless Whoop, and it really falls into this category over here. So let's go ahead and see what's in the box. Okay. So this is what comes in the box right here. I'll go ahead and show you what it looks like. Here is the REX 80. And it does come with some instructions here, which is good. I'm going to be, since this is a plug and play, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to be using an RXSR receiver on it. I did want to hook up smart port and S-Bus, and then I'm also going to be putting on a buzzer. So it does look like it comes with some good instructions here, at least the pinout, so I'll make it a little easier for me to go ahead and wire this thing up, and I'll go ahead and show you how you do that. It also comes with a different battery carrier. This one right here is a basket type carrier. This one you can screw on, and then you can use the little strap that is provided here. So I'll go ahead and get the dry weight of this. Comes in at 42 grams. With a receiver, it's looking at 43 grams. With a 350 mAh 2S battery, 64 grams, which is really reasonable. Actually thought it might be a little heavier than that, as compared to the tiny leader. It's coming in at 46 grams, so it's actually 2 grams lighter than that, which is good news. I will probably end up swapping out the battery basket holder for one that will support a strap, because the battery sizes I'm using are different dimensions than what will fit in this thing. The 350 mAh 2S battery will fit, but since I have a variety of different 2S and 3S batteries, I'll probably go ahead and swap that out. So as far as other specs, these are the Gemfan 1636 4-blade 40 millimeter props. The flight controller is an F4 flight controller. The ESC is 12 amp continuous. Does support BLHeli-S, so 600 D-shot support. And as far as the camera, it's the Cadex Turbo EOS 2. I tend to like that camera. I mean, the color is a little yellowish, or I should say orangish, but what I like about it is the detail in it. So I think that's a good camera. The VTX supports smart audio. It's selectable between 25 and 100 milliwatts. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and wire this thing up. So before you start any project, it's always good to have a plan of action that you're going to do. So my plan is to replace this basket here with the other battery holder and strap that they provided. I would also recommend using, I had this rubber pad here from a prior build that I went ahead and stuck on here to hold the battery a little more secure. I wanted to use these 450 mAh batteries, which 2S batteries, they just don't fit in the basket. And then also I have a 3S battery I was going to try. So I think this is a better solution if you have batteries of varying size. And then also the 350 mAh batteries that I had, GNBs that are 2S, they were just too loose. So again, I think this is a better solution. I'm also going to be adding a buzzer or beeper, and then I'm going to be adding this RXSR, including wiring up smart port and S bus. Now I'm not gonna, you could argue, okay, why aren't you using F port? Well, the problem with F port is you have to use an inverted pad and a non-inverted pad on the RXSR. There's this little pad here, I don't know if you can see it, and it's pretty tiny to have to wire to. And I want to be able to remove this receiver if I want to. If I solder it on here, I can't. But that's another option. You could use F port, but you're going to have to use the non-inverted port here. You'd have to solder it, and it's pretty tiny. So if you look at the pinout right here, the buzzer is going to be attached here. I'm going to be using UART6 for S bus, and I'm going to be using the PPM as soft serial for my smart port, and I'll show you how to configure that in Betaflight. So that's how I'm going to wire it up. Ground 5 volts to the receiver. I'm going to be using PPM again for smart port, and I'm going to use UART6 for S bus. I'm going to go ahead and take the canopy off in the basket. So get the basket off, you have to remove these 4 screws here. The canopy's held on with 4 screws on the outer corners here, so I can get to the flight controller and flight controller stack. This is what it looks like with the cover off. This is the existing cable harness. I'm going to desolder that. This cable harness that came with the RXSR is much better. These are silicon wires, and plus this doesn't have enough connectors in it. So I'm going to go ahead, and it's a different connector. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this and solder this up. So this is what it looks like after it's wired up. I have the yellow wire to the PPM pad, which is going to be my smart port. Green wire to UART6 for S bus. Red wire to the 5 volt pad. Then ground pad for the receiver. Then I went ahead and wired up the buzzer here. The red goes to the positive side, of course black to the negative side. If you're familiar with my channel, I use unused pins a lot to set up soft serial for smart port. You can refer to those, but it's real simple. Basically you type in resource space PPM, which is the pad I'm going to be using that was mapped to B08. So you need to free up that resource, and I just say resource space PPM space 1 none, and then you need to set up the serial port here. So you type in resource space serial underscore TX space 11, and then that's mapped to B08. So I'll go ahead and show you what other things I've changed in Betaflight Configurator. All right, let's go through the configuration and the configurator setup. I went ahead and calibrated the accelerometer. As far as ports, I do have soft serial enabled, which I'll show you in the next tab. So you need to make sure that this is set to smart port, so you get telemetry information. We're using UART 6 now for S-Bus, so that needs to be turned on. And then you need to make sure that for UART 3, for smart audio, you have that set to TBS smart audio here. So going to the configuration tab, make sure this is set up for DShot 600. I have loaded Betaflight 4.0 release candidate 3, so it did come with the motor idle throttle value at 5.5%. You can turn on or off motor stop. One thing I did change is the gyro update frequency and PID loop. This is an F4, so 8K, 8K. Did turn on the accelerometer. Did change the maximum arm angle to 180, so you can blip the throttle to get out of trees. This needs to be set up to a serial-based receiver, and then the serial receiver provider needs to be S-Bus. And then you need to enable soft serial, because that will give you that in the ports tab, so that you can set that up. So this needs to be turned on in order to set up soft serial on your ports tab over here. So moving on, went ahead and put in a craft name here, REX 80. I don't have air mode on all the time. It's on a switch. You need to turn on OSD, anti-gravity, and dynamic filter were already on, and left these pretty much alone except for turning this off on USB. Then didn't change anything on the power and battery tab. I've already set up failsafe. The PID tuning, didn't really make any changes to it other than putting my rates on, and I do have a rate switch. These just happen to be my rates. I'm going to try the defaults to see how well it flies. I'll do that right now. I think I'm going to set this to 0.3 like I normally do for my feed forward transition. It just makes it a little smoother. So I'll go ahead and do that. And I-term relax. I left that alone, except I think right now I'm going to, instead of set point, since I like to do, freestyle, I'm going to change that to gyro, and leave everything else alone as defaults. The TPA and the TPA breakpoint, I'm going to go ahead and leave those as default and see how it flies. So I'll save that. I'm not going to mess with the filters. You can see that they do have biquad turned on here and over here as well, so I'm not going to mess with that. Let's see, receiver. I'm going to go ahead and set that up for AETR1234, and then RC smoothing was already set up correctly. As far as modes, these are my modes. This is just my normal setup. So I have an arm switch on aux2. aux1 is my what mode I'm flying in. So I fly in angle or horizon mode, and then when it's in the up position, I'm flying in air mode, in acro air mode. So that's over here. I do have a beeper, so I set up a beeper on aux3 on a switch, and it's a 3-position switch. Then I have a flip over on crash on that same switch, so when it's in this position, it'll put it into turtle mode, and then when it's in the center position, it turns on the beeper. So that's all I changed there. And like I was saying, I do have a rate switch that I have set up, so I can change my rates from acro to more of a racing profile. I have two different ones for that, but mostly I fly in my acro rate profile. Let's see, OSD, these are just things that I like turning on, so it's a personal preference. So the only other thing I did was I did turn on, if you look at my VTX settings, since this VTX will put out 100 milliwatts, I do set the VTX low power disarm equal on, so that's just transmitting at 25 milliwatts when it's not armed. So here are my final thoughts on the Spedix REX 80. The pros: the frame design is the highlight of this quad. The camera angle adjustment is, I think it's one of the better designs, because you can adjust it to very flat for indoor flying, all the way up to, you know, very extreme angle like this, almost 90. Well, there it's about 90 degrees. So I think that's really nice. I think the frame is very, very durable. I mean, I crashed this thing several times. I've been flying it for about a week with different batteries in different conditions, and the frame held up quite well. The other pro is it flies excellent with 4.0 release candidate 3 beta flight firmware on it. And I played with the PIDs a little bit. I did increase the roll and pitch P gains about 3 points up. And I also changed the feed forward, cranked that up a little bit, and I'll put on the screen what my final settings were. I just needed to tighten it up just slightly, but it actually flew quite well. I'm not sure if it's because the Betaflight 4.0 has better filtering, but this thing is not soft mounted, and I was a little concerned about that, but it flies really nicely with freestyle, light freestyle, a park flyer. It did a great job. I was also very pleased at how good it flies indoors with the camera angle turned down. It was very manageable to fly indoors. I mean, it's not going to replace like your brushed, and here in this case, this is an Acro B Light newbie drone. But if you want to fly it indoors, I actually didn't have any trouble at all flying this. So that's a definite pro as well. I also like that it has an F4 flight controller. So I think it's going to be future-proof. The Betaflight devs are saying that after 4.0, in other words, when 5.0 comes out, they're not going to be supporting the F3 flight controller anymore. So this is definitely future-proof. I like that it has the 20 by 20 F4 flight controller stack with separate ESC, which means you could use this on a traditional frame if you got tired of the whoop frame at a later stage. Also, I think for the price, I think it's a good value. You have to add a receiver because it's a plug and play, but overall, I think what you get is a good value. So let's go over the cons. Because it requires some fine soldering skills, and there's little documentation other than a pinout diagram that you get, I would not recommend this for a beginner pilot. You need to be very careful not to lift the pads on the flight controller when you're soldering. I used a very fine tip soldering iron. So from that point of view, you just need to be very careful so you don't lift a pad up. The other thing I already mentioned, it does not have a soft mounted flight controller. So from that point of view, it would have been better if it was soft mounted, but it doesn't seem to matter with Betaflight 4.0, and I'm assuming that's because it has better filtering. I don't think the flight time is that good as compared to the tiny leader. Even though the tiny leader is heavier, I think these deeper ducts make it more efficient. If you are using, I would recommend the 450 MAH GNB batteries. When I tried the 350 2-cell batteries, these Betaflight ones, it didn't do too well as far as flight time, about 2.5 minutes. Likewise on the 3S, 300 mAh batteries. Yeah, it has a slight bit more of punch out, but it really wasn't that noticeable. I think you become prop limited. So the battery I would recommend are these 450s. But with those, I was getting about 4 minutes of part flying time, and indoors I was getting about flying in angle mode, I was getting about 4 minutes and 40 some seconds worth of flight time. So with those batteries, the GNB batteries, you get a little more flight time. So that's what I would recommend. Let's see, the other con I would say is I think the parts might be a little hard to get for this. I did end up searching around and did find a frame kit for this, so I'd recommend, because I think that the only thing that's kind of a weak point, you can kind of see that the canopy right here, this top piece, is very soft plastic. I think it's going to hold up well. I mean, like I said, I did crash it a lot, but I could see where maybe that might crack. You notice I have a little crease here. So we'll see how well it holds up over time, but I did get an extra canopy and frame just in case. But the frame itself is, boy, it's really solid and beefy, so I don't think that's going to break. At least I didn't get it to break. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and show you some flight footage. And I would say that, yes, I would recommend this quad if you are more experienced at soldering and aware of how to set things up in Betaflight, like I showed you in my video. But for a new beginner pilot, I would say it might frustrate you to get this quad. Also, if you have a tiny leader, I think there's too much overlap between these two. They're very comparable. So if you have one of these already, I probably wouldn't need to pick up that. I just like the Tiny Whoop class, and I think, where I'm going to be using this, I'm going to be practicing, doing some freestyle with this, because I think the frame is incredibly durable. So I think it's pretty crash resistant. So that's what I'm going to be using it for. And also, I really like that you can adjust the camera angle so easily. So I think that's why I'm going to be using it for light freestyle, to practice freestyle moves. So with that, thanks for watching.